for that classroom experience. Obviously, social distancing will be required, masks as well for teachers as well as students. And then there will be deep cleaning that will be happening overnight, Craig. And what's interesting is that there was a survey that was conducted within the entire school district. 400,000 people responded, and 75% of them actually said they wanted kids back in the school building. Craig?
Kathy Park in New York City. Kathy, thank you. I want to turn now to Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. Madam Speaker, always good to have you. Thanks so much for your time this morning. So many parents are going to bed night after night, Madam Speaker, worried about their kids' safety as districts are making these back-to-school plans. You're a mother, you're a grandmother. I would imagine this is something that's weighing on the minds of you and your own constituents. What are your biggest concerns about reopening schools?
Well, of course, the biggest concern is safety. You're right, I have 9 grandchildren from grade school all the way up to college. And my daughters, who are their parents, this is the constant conversation. Is it safe to send them back in different circumstances? But there is a way. There is a way to improve the opportunity for children, to put children first. We have it in the HEROES Act, $100 billion stabilization fund specifically to address the coronavirus impacts in the schools. Most of it is for K through 12, and it addresses what you would expect, spacing and what is entailed in that, hygiene, sanitation, training. Also, beyond that figure, also more money for broadband so that kids, as your last guest was talking about, so that there's training for distance learning, but also there's capability for every child to participate in that. So let's say, number one, if we're going to do it, let's give it its best shot and make a judgment if that's good enough. In addition to that, in the HEROES Act, we have the testing and all of that. And that requires the president to implement the Defense Production Act. So we have the PPE, the personal protective equipment, and we have the equipment for testing, and very importantly, the equipment to get the results from the testing. It's no use taking a test if you're not going to get your results for a week later. So all of these things are related to the safety of our children going back. Is it hybrid? Is it virtual? Is it actual? Well, let's give it our best shot, putting our children first. We know what we need to do. The Republicans have resisted the HEROES Act, and in partial because they don't want to support the state and local government, which is essential to the safety of our children going back to school as well. The resources are there. We have to make a decision, the safety of our children, and only then can we talk about that. And so when I listen to my kids talk about their children and my grandchildren talk about their, it's very similar to what you heard from your very special guests, the moms and the children, and their point of view on this. We have to look out for our children, our teachers, custodians. There are many people who are involved in the education of our children. Let's show that we put children first and their education by putting the resources there, because without the resources, we shouldn't even be thinking about sending them back to school.
Madam Speaker, as you know, the Secretary of Education on Sunday, she refused to say whether schools should follow guidelines from the CDC on reopening. She says those guidelines are meant to be flexible. There's been some reporting that we're going to get some new CDC guidelines this week that would help dictate how some of these school districts determine whether they should reopen and how. Have you been in contact with the CDC? Do you know what these guidelines are going to look like?
No, what I heard was that they were going to respond to a tweet by the president. I would hope they would be responsive to the science. I'm always happy when there are new guidelines if they're based on additional information, scientifically based. So we'll see what they are. But this is as serious as it gets. Here we have a pandemic. We're talking about the education of our children. We're talking about what that means to families in terms of their ability to go back to work. We can open the economy, we can open our schools if we test, trace, treat, separate, mask, hygiene, and the rest. But we have to make a national decision to do it. And I'll tell you this, I'm very afraid of where we are now because of the ignorance in the administration about what needs to be done, the recognition of the challenge that we face, and the threat to the health and well-being of the American people. And if we don't make the investments, including putting money in the pockets of the American people with unemployment insurance and direct payments, including honoring our heroes, our healthcare workers, our transit teachers, sanitation workers, our public employees, if we don't put that money there, we're not going to be able, we're going to pay a big price, worse hit on the economy. So they complain, they say, oh, it's too much money. They didn't mind giving $2 trillion, adding $2 trillion to the national debt to give a tax cut, 83% of which went to the top 1%. And yet they want to quibble over what we need to do to open up our economy, open up our schools, respect. We have no right, we have no authority to thank our first responders and our healthcare workers and our frontline people in this fight against the pandemic unless we're willing to support them. The HEROES Act, named for them, does precisely that.
Madam Speaker, what about this advice that we've been getting from medical professionals who point out that missing school for millions of kids, that means missing breakfast and lunch. Schools also provide an escape for unsafe situations at home. How do we balance those needs with the safety needs of this pandemic?
Well, of course, that is something we have always fought for, and it's so sad that for many of our children, their breakfast, their lunch, and their food comes for when they go to school, and we have a plan on how these kids, when they're not in school, will be fed, and the mobile units going out. We've had this for summer school in the past, not related to a pandemic, but we know how to get this done. But the fact is, it's not a question of balancing equities. It's about a question of crossing a threshold of safety. We cannot say to kids, well, go to school, you might get sick, and take it home, because they're the biggest risk. The biggest risk to the spread of the pandemic is opening up the schools in a way that is not safe. Is not safe. So if we're going to defeat this pandemic, we shouldn't be opening up to more arena to spread. We should use this as an opportunity for our children, put the resources in. We know what needs to be done. The resources are there to do it. And it addresses many disparities in our education system. And when the administration talks about cutting off federal funds, which they really can't do, the federal funds are mostly for children in economically disadvantaged areas, Title I. They're for children with disabilities. They're for homeless children. There are other things, teacher training and the rest. But they're hitting right again at the disparity in education when they say that. You have to wonder if they really do believe in public education, which is the basis of a democracy.
I want to weigh in right there what you're saying. And I agree with everything that Madam Speaker is talking about pertaining to our children being imperative that we do not cut corners on safety violation issues. You know, we cut corners for a while on not bringing in deputized deputies into our school systems because of cost. And we see, consequently, the last episode that happened in a school system, which was down in Florida, of the madness that can create pertaining to a deranged shooter wanting to come into a school system and massacre our children. We as a society here in America cannot afford to be lax, nor can we afford to be reckless in these decisions that we're fixing to have to make within the next 4 to 6 weeks of opening back up our school systems. I don't know what it's going to take pertaining to making sure that everybody has a clean bill of health. And I realize you have your conspiracy theories out there that's bringing forth these type of accusations towards saying, oh, this is all part of the New World Order towards controlling us. Well, you can say whatever you want to say, but the bottom line is safety, and the bottom line is our future as a society. Because without our children, we have no future. For surely people understand that. Even the conspirators should understand that. And to violate their safety is to violate our future. That would be like General Motors or Ford or Chrysler putting together an automobile and not putting together the safety features that now we know today are crucial. In other words, if they didn't put ABS systems, if they didn't put third back brake lights, if they didn't put in seat belts, if they didn't put in seat belt tensioners, if they didn't put in airbags, if they didn't put in crushed columns, steering columns, if they didn't put in the right type of materials so that the vehicle, the fuselage would basically be protected in case of a head-on collision, it would absolutely be asinizing to society to think that General Motors, Ford, or Chrysler was going to do this and put vehicles out there on the road for families to be a part of. It's the same way we go on to school. There is no cost pertaining to human cost in regards to taking care of these obligations that need to be fulfilled with our children. I don't know if it's going to set up testing stations in all schools to where you automatically get checked coming into school of your temperature. I don't know if it's going to take some sort of initiated plan of once you have figured out that this child possibly has the coronavirus versus the cold, that he or she is to go over here in this department versus back over here in this department. I don't know if it's going to require for you to do digital teaching as far as teaching them online versus maintaining some sort of a course of teaching so that they will be ready for society whenever they grow up. I don't know what it's going to take. I'm sure there's people in the school administration industry that knows exactly what it's going to take and how it's going to take it. But the bottom line is this: we do not need a president holding the American people hostage over our future or over our children at the expense of possibly losing our society, maybe not necessarily this year or even next year, but looking through the lenses of the future, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, after the majority of the elder society is probably already going to be dead and gone. Yes, it is imperative towards how that we view, grade, and discharge up onto these type of issues. And to think that money is an issue, to think that the good old American dollar bill is going to come in between the American future of our society, of Old Glory remaining Old Glory versus cutting Old Glory off at its knees, at her knees, is just absolutely appalling to me. It's absolutely asinizingly appalling to me to think, it's sickening to think that we would be willing to jeopardize our future while we sit back and watch squandering companies take advantage of the tax-paying dollars. This is serious. This is serious in the limelight of our future towards us succeeding as a nation. This is serious not only towards each and every parent and each and every child to the parent, but this is serious with each and every child. Because once we lose our children, we have basically lost it all. You know, we can make hiccups in society. We can deal with terrorism. We can deal with other misguided, unfortunate behaviors, regardless whether it be protest out of hand or shootings or etc., etc. And all these things are very, very crucial. All these things is right up there on top towards of the most high importance. But there's nothing any more important than the discussion of what the majority of the school systems is talking about right now, pertaining to how are we going to be able to mandate, separate, fluctuate as a school society is supposed to in our teaching ethics if we do not have safety barriers involved in case this thing winds up getting unleashed inside of a school system. It's the same way towards our digital computer system. That it was a lack of safety precautions upon our behalf, that we did not have these firewalls set up to where people like North Korea and China and other bad actors could not infiltrate into our system to the point of either taking our identity or basically breaching into some of the major corporations that has been hacked just within the past 5 years. We're going to have to learn, folks. We have an enemy out there. Satan is running rampant in every area, in every department that you can think of. And unless we decide that we're going to work smarter instead of harder, we probably don't have a snowball chance in hell in defeating this enemy. We're going to have to unify. We're going to have to come together in defeating these problems, because each and every problem is the basis of whether or not we succeed as a nation or we do not succeed as a nation. And it's not just that way as a nation, but it's that way basically as the world. The productivity of a functioning society upon this planet. And once we lose a vision of that, once we lose the importance of that, then we lose our society. And once we lose our society, we lose our future to our society. So it is imperative. The things that she's talking about right now, and she hasn't finished yet, I'll go back to what she's talking about here in a second. But it is absolutely imperative for our school systems to pay very, very close attention in the next 4 to 6 weeks towards what is going to be deemed as acceptable and what is going to be deemed as non-acceptable. And no, this don't have nothing to do with some sort of control freak atmosphere pertaining to the New World Order, pertaining to controlling people. This has got to do with saving lives. You can ask Chrysler. You can ask General Motors. You can ask Ford. whenever they put the safety features in these automobiles that they put in these automobiles. It ain't got nothing to do with nothing other than being safe. Knowing that if that family gets caught up in an accident, their odds of surviving is going to be basically limited to almost none if they do not put these safety features in those automobiles. It is imperative that we put airbags, ABS, third brake lights, seat belts, collapse steering columns, make the steel around the fuselage 5 times stronger than the rest of the steel. That way, if the vehicle has to be rolled over and gets involved in a major accident, possibly the person driving it will be able to walk away, or at least walk away with minor injuries. It is imperative. And when we stop focusing on that, then we are basically a doomed society. Please, let's listen to the rest of this as Madam Speaker is speaking.
Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. Madam Speaker, thank you. Thank you for your time this
Pleasure.
Monday morning. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
We are just getting started on this back.
Sorry about that. I thought that she had some more to want to say. I didn't preview this before I cut in on that. I thought that she had more to correspond with us as a society, and obviously she didn't, so I'm sorry about leading you on towards thinking that she was going to say something. Let's listen to the rest of whatever that this commentator has to say this morning about this pandemic and about going back to school and these major issues that are now facing the American people and the people all over the world.
School pandemic special. We are going to hear from parents, from teachers, even the experts making the call on how to keep your child safe. Our doctors are standing by to help answer the questions that you're asking us, including one that impacts the 26 million kids who ride the bus to school.
26 million children that ride the bus. That ain't counting those that don't ride the bus. And that ain't counting the high school kids that once they get old enough to get their own driver's license, they drive themselves to school. And that ain't counting the college kids. We have lots of people engaged in learning activities for the future of tomorrow. And when we quit focusing on that, and when we start limiting our resources towards that, then we are only limiting our future. Donald Trump, as far as I'm concerned, never should have even spewed that out of his mouth in what he talked about towards going to defund the school,
And 450
defund the school program if they don't open up immediately, or if they don't do this, or if they don't follow this, or if they don't do that. He never should have said what he said towards going to defund the schools. Just like this ideology going to defund all these police officers throughout these cities that has to deal with all these harsh conditions. The ideal never should have even been entertained, as far as I'm concerned, towards defunding. Defunding is not the answer to the problem in our police departments. The problem in our police departments is that various people that hold positions over our police departments are not obviously doing what they're supposed to do, pertaining to commissioners and superintendents and people. That's what their jobs are supposed to be, is to make sure that these police officers, that some of them have serious problems, not all of them, but some of them has serious problems, in thinking that they got basically a license to do whatever that they want to do to whatever citizen that they want to do it to in some of these precincts. The problem isn't directly with the police, but it's indirectly towards who holds management over the police officers. Your captains, your higher rank people, your mayors. Those are the people that should be held accountable for a lot of this brutality that goes on in these police departments that is never weeded out, that is never taken care of. Defunding is not the answer, regardless whether it be the police or the schools. You're going to have law and order in both. But at the same time, we're also juggling a different ball now. We're juggling the COVID-19 ball, the pandemic ball. We're juggling that around now. So you have to, I hate to say it, be able to turn somersaults and cartwheels at the same time, chew bubblegum, and land on your feet. And if you can't do it, if you can't make the cut, then maybe you need to get out of the position that you're in, regardless whether it's the school system or it's the law enforcement system. Either or can be looked upon as dereliction of duty. But at the same time, you don't want to use $20,000 worth of resources over somebody that's got $17 worth of pot. That was not a violent criminal offense to begin with. To me, it's an oxymoron. It's a double-edged sword pertaining to child support. Why would you want to take an individual out of the workforce that could not or did not pay child support, knowing that that's only going to add insult to misery by throwing that individual off into some sort of a jailhouse? The only thing that I can come up with in that regard towards punishment is to take away from that person's retirement. Whatever purse he or she may have in regards towards their retirement, that's the area that you need to go after towards defunding or penalizing their retirement profitabilities, because they did not do what they were supposed to have done on the front end. Now they get punished on the back end. No one gets a free ride in this. No one gets a free ride. And whoever told you that that's what America is about, towards getting a free ride, somebody has lied to you. Because first of all, money doesn't grow on trees. Secondly, there is accountability issues. Thirdly, nobody is above the law. And that includes, yes, Donald Trump. And yes, Donald Trump can do things that are not only impeachable offenses, but he can actually be disbarred or dismantled from his position or his post. And don't think for a second that he can't. This thing has turned into a Wild Wild West show, a free-for-all. And until we as a society, as a smart society, decides that we're going to put our arms and our hands around it and our minds around it towards controlling these issues, I mean, you gotta admit, the school system was already at its breaking point before the pandemic ever hit. A lot of these school systems couldn't even provide food for some of their children, which are basically turning into daycare centers. And without these daycare centers, without these schools, these children are sure enough going to do without. They're sure enough going to suffer, because they're already unprivileged to begin with, disadvantaged. There are disadvantaged families out there, probably 8 out of 10, especially in some of the slum areas, some of the worst hit areas in Memphis and St. Louis and Nashville and Atlanta, and Chicago, and New York, and LA, and I could go on and on. We have all these dysfunctional families that has dysfunctional circumstances going on in their lives, and if the school system does not provide the right course, the right methods of what to eat, how to eat, the teaching skills, the schools, the children of the future will be left behind. And they was already suffering immensely before the coronavirus ever hit. Now this is just going to add a cherry on top towards possibly, I hope that it don't break the camel's back, but it possibly could break the camel's back. We're going to have to pull together. As I put out a while ago, we get by with a little help from our friends. We get by with a little help from our friends. That's how we're going to make it through this. We're going to have to pull together. We're going to have to unify. We're going to have to put our heads and our brains together. And we're going to have to create that strong unity and that strong bond.
Just emails, with questions about sending kids back to school in this pandemic. So we invited two medical experts on to try and answer as many of them as possible. Dr. Derek Cass is an emergency room physician at Columbia University Medical Center, and Dr. Mordechai Akhter is an assistant professor at the University of Arizona College of Medicine. Our first question comes from Melissa in California. She sent it in via cell phone video. Take a look.
I just had a baby this summer and I have two older children. Their school is offering an online or a hybrid program, and I'm wondering if I should send my kids online because the risk for exposure to my baby. What are the studies showing about COVID-19 in infants under 1?
Dr. Cass, what do you think?
So we actually don't have a lot of studies yet on the exposure risk for young children, especially children under 1. We know that neonates under 28 days should always be protected from infection, and under 3 months you should still be very cautious. The truth is every parent's going to have to make the decision for themselves, the exposure risk for other people living in their house, whether it's an elderly grandparent, an immune-compromised child like I have, or a young baby, about whether or not going to school, which is going to be an increased risk, is a risk worth taking, or the parents want to invest in staying home and doing virtual learning the entire time.
A lot of parents are asking about how to get their kids to school. Peter asks, how will school buses be kept clean and drivers protected? How can buses run with 25% occupancy and get all kids to school on time? Without the school bus, many kids can't get to school. Critical. Dr. Akhter, any ideas on that one?
That's a great question that Peter is asking, and it actually gets to some of the inequalities we have, not just in healthcare, but also in the schooling system. There are plenty of parents who can't just drive their kids to school who need the school bus system. There are certain counties that have set it up such that kids are only allowed 1 per row, and they're able to distance, but these are the wealthier schools. So one of the things we have to do, I know this sounds crazy, but we actually have to be able to fund education. You need money to be able to protect the kids. And so the ideal situation is having more bus routes, keeping the drivers protected and keeping the kids protected by distancing them on buses, which will just require more money. We got to be able to be willing to spend money for our children.
Up next is a question from Denise. She is a mother in Milwaukee. Take a look.
Not every school has air conditioning, and in some cases, students and teachers use fans to keep themselves cool. Is that something that is still safe as long as face masks are used, or are face shields needed now? And is the best solution really for schools to give those classrooms air conditioning units?
Dr. Akhter, what do you think is best there?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's hard to know how much of the particles are aerosolized right now by either air conditioning units versus fans. But again, this points to what I was saying earlier. There are a lot of inequalities in the school system. Listen, I'm in Arizona. I saw a lot of heat stroke patients yesterday. It is brutally hot here, brutally dry here. Now, the benefit of that is that we're better about air conditioning here, but there are some states and some systems that think, hey, maybe we can get by without it, or in some cases where the air conditioning systems break down. I think it is very important to have excellent maintenance of the air conditioning systems as well as fan systems and try to distance people as much as possible. And I agree, masks are great, and if you feel like a shield will protect you more, I think that's not necessarily a bad idea, but it's most important that the schools do their utmost and that the government helps them do their utmost to keep this classrooms cool so that people can actually survive and learn.
All right, Dr. Akhter, Dr. Kass, don't go far. We've got more questions to answer. We'll get to those in just a moment. For many families, back to school just a few short weeks away. The superintendent who runs one of the largest districts in the nation says the time for debate is over. Now is the time to get to work. He's going to join me next. Also, what happens if there's a virus outbreak at school? I'll talk to former U.S. Education Secretary Arne Duncan about the current Education Secretary's ideas.
When you have diabetes, managing your blood sugar is crucial. Try Boost Glucose Control. The patented blend is clinically shown to help manage blood sugar levels. It provides 60% more protein than the leading diabetes nutrition shake. Try
Go on. About right there.
We're back with our special look at how students and teachers will return to school in the middle of this pandemic. And one of the biggest concerns for parents and school officials is what to do if there's an outbreak of coronavirus in a school. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos was asked about that over the weekend.
And what happens if it faces an outbreak?
There's really good examples that have been utilized in the private sector and elsewhere. All of that data and all of that information and all of those examples can be referenced by school leaders.
But I'm not hearing a plan from the Department of Education. Do you have a plan
But
for what students and what schools should do?
So schools should do what's right on the ground at that time for their students and for their situation.
Joining me now is Secretary DeVos's predecessor, Arne Duncan. He was the Education Secretary in the Obama administration. Secretary Duncan, first let me just note that we've invited Secretary DeVos to join in our weekly special anytime. But Secretary Duncan, I want to start with just your reaction to what we just heard there from Betsy DeVos.
Well, first of all, just good morning. Thanks for having me. Thanks for taking viewer questions. It's so important to have these conversations. What we're seeing, my personal honest belief is just a catastrophic failure of leadership coming from the Trump administration. And they've taken a really, really bad, pandemic and made it infinitely worse. It's now become a man-made disaster. And the consequences for children, for teachers, for staff, for education have been pretty devastating.
You mentioned viewer questions. We've got one for you. This one comes from Patricia Prime from New York. It's about substitute teachers.
If you're taking the temperature of everyone who enters the school, and maybe a lot of teachers have temperatures, how will you get enough subs to cover? This is a problem we've had since before the pandemic.
What would you tell her, Secretary Duncan?
Yeah, so whether we're going to have enough substitutes or not, we'll see. I think the larger question is, what does school look like this fall? And I think best case scenario is some kind of hybrid situation where we have children in school part of each day or part of each week and doing it virtually the rest of the time. The best chance we have to reopen schools is to reduce the number of cases in our communities right now. What we do over the next month will determine whether or not schools can physically open. And I have to be really honest, this is going to be a game time decision. Things are changing so rapidly, and unfortunately, many places in the country changing in the wrong direction. We have to step up now and make the sacrifices to give our children a chance to go back to school. And then let me be really clear, the goal here is not to reopen school. The goal is to keep school open. And if we reopen and then have to shut down after 2 weeks or 3 weeks, that just further traumatizes, re-traumatizes kids who've been through so much already. So we have to be thoughtful, careful, deliberate, move on this in a slow and steady manner.
You co-wrote a piece in the Atlantic entitled "These 8 Basic Steps Will Let Us Reopen Schools," and you write, quote, "Students, teachers, and staff should all wear masks throughout the school day, although this may be challenging for younger children. Consider adopting reward systems to encourage mask wearing and hand washing." Here's the question, Secretary Duncan. Is it fair to ask our teachers, most of whom are already grossly underpaid, is it fair to ask them to be responsible now for mask wearing, for social distancing, for all of that? Is that a fair ask?
Well, I think so often we ask too much of teachers, but teachers always rise to the challenge. What we have to do is not just ask them to do this by themselves. Again, communities have to step up and take the steps to reduce this virus. Congress has to invest with the president's support, which may or may not happen, but it needs to happen now, between $150 and $200 billion in our nation's schools right now to make them safer for staff, for teachers, for custodians, for lunchroom workers, for bus drivers, for children, and for their parents and grandparents back home. This has to be about collective responsibility, shared sacrifice, all of us rallying behind our nation's children. If that doesn't happen, then our children will not be able to return to physical schools, and that would break my heart.
Former Education Secretary Arne Duncan. Secretary Duncan, thank you. Hope you'll come back here. We're going to do this again up until Labor Day. Thank you for your time and insight as always.
Anytime. Thank you so much for your focus on this. It really means a lot.
One district that's running out of time to make decisions is Clark County. It's in Nevada. It is this country's 5th largest school district, and it includes Las Vegas. The district is just 20 business days away from its scheduled first day of school. I want to bring in the superintendent for the Clark County School District, Jesus Chara, Mr. Superintendent. The district's blueprint for reopening follows Nevada's guidelines, a staggered schedule for in-person learning. Take us through that plan and how it's going to keep students and faculty safe.
Yeah, well, first of all, good morning and thank you for having me. It's been a collective process, really putting together a working group of not only administrators, teachers, all my support staff, parents, community leaders, really to provide input on how we were going to open school if we are to open up face-to-face. And as the former Secretary Arne Duncan mentioned, we ended up with a hybrid model submitted to the state of really a hybrid that allows us to pivot which way it may allow us to go to distance education, face-to-face, or a blended model. But let me say this, I think one of the things that are most important for me as a superintendent and also a father is really not putting our children in harm's way and our adults, right? I think what COVID-19 has done in this country, especially around our urban public schools, is really magnified the inequities in urban education. And I think what we're facing right now is some of the challenges that for the limited funding. Clark County, Las Vegas, Nevada, we are one of the lowest funded urban public school systems in the country. And we're facing a huge challenge. If we go to a distance education program right now, there'll be about 96,000 devices that I need for my children. So it becomes an inequitable situation for my kids, where it's really continuing that magnifying glass. So the plan that we have is the best case scenario, practicing social distancing and being able to put our kids, because at least 2 days a week, it allows us to put our children in school in front of our hardworking teachers. But then I have the challenge also for the safety of our staff as well. And it's a real challenge. So, I'm going to tell you, it's going to be a slow, methodical process as us moving forward.
Mr. Superintendent, you just alluded to something I wanted to ask you about. Let's say one of these support staff members comes to you, or a teacher, they come to you and they say, I have an immune compromised son, or I take care of my aging parent. I don't feel safe being in that classroom because I have to go home. What are you telling those teachers who don't feel safe coming into work?
Well, I think it goes back to what the plan. We also have a hybrid model. Part of the model is also where there's distance education full time, where not only the adults and also are students that don't feel safe because they have a compromising adult at home as well. So there's that piece of that plan there. One of the things that we're working on, and again, it goes back to, we see it in the private industry, and I think this goes back to the core issue of the lack of funding and the lack of investment in our children. And this is where I say this is not a time to cut education. This is a time where we have to really invest in our students, invest to diversify the economy. And what I'm thinking here, and we'll have to accommodate the employees because there has to be that sense of security for the adult to be on campus, and if they don't feel, we'll have to do the accommodations as well. So it's a variety of issues that we as school systems have to deal with, and right now I'm going to just be candid and say we're getting very little guidance from leadership, not only in the executive branch here, but then also nationally as well. So we are doing the best we can as a community to address the challenges that we have.
Jesus Jara, Superintendent of Clark County.
See, this is the dilemma that I see with the 1%ers versus the 99%ers. We're talking about Nevada. We're talking about Las Vegas. We're talking about some of the richest thugs that thrive off of people with these type of problems and with this kind of money to throw around. But yet now they can't come up with a solution in regards to financially funding the school properly. It don't make sense whenever the rich is still getting richer the way that they have been doing for the past 25 or 30 years. It don't make sense for the rich to continue to keep getting richer while the working class and the poor class continues to struggle and go downhill. Something is out of balance and off center here. When you have some people that hit it lucky and can go to Florida and live in a condominium and have a boat the size of a ship that costs $10,000 just to fill it up and run it for one day. Something is not right here whenever you have this type of an atmosphere of the wealthiest of the wealthy still getting wealthy, but the poorest of the poor getting poorer. Especially at the expense of black labeling our schools because we can't afford to put in no more resources. Wow. Even Donald Trump addressed the problem pertaining to our veterans and our senior citizens in regards towards how come we can't take care of the people that took care of us. It's twisted, it's upside down, and it needs to change. And it needs to change now. Not tomorrow, not next week, not next month, but now. Because we have everything on the line. The stakes has never been higher than what they are pertaining to talking about the well-being of our future. The well-being of our children. There's nothing any more important than what we're talking about right now for the rest of our lives. No matter what it may be. And I realize a lot of times we talk about some very, very important stuff. Regardless whether it's hospitalization, or wars, or peace, or NAFTA, or illegal immigrants. I realize we talk about some important stuff, but there's nothing that's going to exceed above and beyond this particular conversation of our children and our schools, and giving them proper safety environments to learn and to become educated into, so that they can adventure into the future with great successes. Thanks again to my viewers. Good luck to all of us coming from the Windmill Ministries here at 291 Thompson Road. We want to thank you for allowing for us to be a part of your lives and voicing our opinions towards how we see, how we have interpreted, how we have translated, how we have tried to look through the tainted smoke mirror into the future of tomorrow. God bless, and God bless America, and shalom. Thank you, and good luck to all of us.